Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind the loud gods for once, the ones with lightning, lions, and awkward family drama, and we're stepping into a quieter corner of myth, a place where change comes slowly, where nothing explodes, and where the most divine act involves sitting still and placing something small into soft earth. You probably won't survive this unless you're uniquely trained in enduring prolonged gentleness. The sound of grain shifting in your hand and the emotional weight of a whisper meant for seeds. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe fluff your pillow like it's a patch of loamy soil, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not in Olympus, you're in a valley, broad, fertile, and laced with the hush of early spring. The soil is still cool. The wind doesn't do anything dramatic. It just moves through the barley and leaves the scent of moss behind. This is where Demeter prefers to walk, not with thunder underfoot, not with a retinue of winged messengers, just a staff made of olive wood, and steps that press gently into the field without ever breaking the crust too much. She doesn't disturb, she settles. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the ancient Greek pantheon, Demeter was the goddess of agriculture, fertility, and sacred growth. But unlike the flashier deities who demanded temples, war chants, or the occasional heroic panic, Demeter's worship was rooted, quite literally, in the earth. Her presence was invoked through planting, harvest, and seasons, and she was honored as a goddess who understood time. Not time in a grand cosmic way, time in the dirt between your fingernails way, time in the when to wait before you water the field way. Her myths, her festivals, and her rituals taught one thing above all to grow something. You must first know how to leave it alone. Fringe detail in some regions of ancient Greece. Small patches of farmland were deliberately left unplanted during festivals to Demeter, not as a failure to farm, but as an offering. Let the land sleep, the priests would say. She'll wake it when it's ready. It was considered an act of faith to give the goddess an untouched square of earth, something for her to hold in silence. You walk beside her now, though she doesn't speak. She carries a pouch filled with seed, but she's not casting them yet. She poses often, pressing her palm to the soil, waiting. You notice that she watches the shade as much as the sun, that she listens to the roots, and this is your scholarly uncertainty. Did the earliest worshippers of Demeter see her as a literal mother of grain, or something broader, perhaps a personification of all slowness? All restoration scholars still debate. Some see her as a fertility symbol, adapted for agriculture. Others argue she represents the human understanding that life must sometimes pause, that absence and presence are not opposites, but partners. A soft furrow runs beside the path. Demeter leans down, fingers the edge of it, then hums a note that doesn't carry, but seems to rest gently on the air. This is your journey style moment now. You kneel. You place your hand against the soil. It's damp, forgiving, a little gritty beneath your fingertips. No one asks you to plant anything, but somehow, you know the point of this evening isn't to do. It's to feel what the soil is ready for, and tonight, it's ready for stillness. A few stalks of last year's wheat rustle beside you. their golden husks pale in the light. They weren't gathered, they were left, as if to say, not every gift must be taken. Demeter glances toward you, just once, not in warning, not in instruction, just acknowledgement. And then she moves on, not away, just forward. Her whisper doesn't follow, but the hush she leaves behind is louder than any anthem. You follow slowly. There's no rush here, not from Demeter, and certainly not from the field, which seems to measure time in days and decades rather than hours. The grass is short, not because it's been trimmed, but because it simply knows when to stop. Even the wind seems to tiptoe through the barley, barely brushing the tops, as if not to wake what isn't ready yet. This is not a place for loud arrivals. It's a place for waiting. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greeks believed that seeds didn't just grow, they slept. And like all sleepers, they had to be coaxed into rest before they could wake again. Demeter wasn't simply the goddess who made things grow. She was the one who taught seeds how to wait. She governed not just fertility, but dormancy. It was understood that the soil needed time, that the seeds needed silence, and that nothing good ever came from trying to rush the earth. You walk past a wide patch of tilled earth, freshly turned but not yet planted. It's been smoothed by hand, not rake. You can see the gentle marks of fingers, maybe left by a priestess earlier in the day, or perhaps by someone old enough to know the field's rhythm. No one has drawn lines. No one has made a grid. This isn't a farm, it's a conversation. And seeds, apparently, prefer whispers, fringe detail in certain rural villages. It was customary to sing the seed to sleep at the moment of planting. These weren't songs of harvest or celebration. They were more like lullabies, repeated phrases, low-pitched and slow, meant not for the planter, but for the earth. In one surviving ritual fragment, the lyrics simply repeat, rest now, grow later, rest now. The logic wasn't magical, it was emotional. Seeds, like people, did better when introduced gently to change. Your scholarly uncertainty here lies in interpretation. Were these rituals expressions of mythic belief, or practical acts of agricultural mindfulness? Some scholars argue that these chants and offerings were symbolic extensions of Demeter's mythology. Others believe they were embedded wisdom, early examples of sustainable planting culture hidden inside religious structure. The answer may be both, or neither, or simply something older than answers. You pause beside a low mound of earth where a few scattered grains rest on the surface. They've not yet been pressed beneath the soil, not forgotten, just allowed. You glance up. Demeter stands not far off, her hands folded loosely in front of her, as though cradling nothing at all. She isn't watching you, she's listening, to the field, to the slope of the light, to something no longer spoken aloud. This is your journey-style moment. You crouch beside the grain. You press your thumb softly into the dirt. The soil yields, not too much, just enough. You place a single seed beneath the surface. You don't cover it right away. You wait. The way Demeter waits, not to see something happen, but to give it room. When you do cover it, it's with your palm, not your fingers. You press it gently, like tucking in a child who has already begun to sleep. And as you rise, a breeze stirs the hem of your robe, not dramatically, just as a kind of answer nearby. You hear the faint sound of a staff brushing stone. Demeter has moved on again. You follow, not because she commands, because her presence feels like a door you can walk through without needing to knock. A furrow stretches before you, unfinished, waiting. You don't plant, you simply notice how ready it is, and for tonight, that's enough. The valley narrows as you walk, and the ground rises in slow folds, gentle hills that hold heat from the day. You're in Thessaly now, though the name isn't spoken. It lives in the shape of the terrain, the slope of the olive trees, the way the wind carries a dustiness that suggests something ancient has just been stirred and settled again before anyone could ask what it was. You're not alone, but it's not a crowd either. Just scattered figures, older women with baskets of grain, children watching from low stone walls, a man mending a furrow with one foot pressed against the earth, as if checking its pulse. This is the land where Demeter was first honored not just as a goddess, but as a presence, not distant, not divine in the way Olympus demanded, but present in the fields, the furrows, and the moments before planting. Her temples here were not marble. They were shaded clearings, flat stones, groves where people whispered, not because they feared her, but because they loved her. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Thessaly was one of the earliest Greek regions to associate Demeter with active agricultural practice, while she was worshipped across the Greek world. In Thessaly, her rituals were distinctly local, earthy, community-centered, seasonal. Many scholars believe that this region's agricultural wealth played a role in shaping how Demeter's myths became intertwined with human labor, not abstract fertility, but actual, physical cycles of planting and resting. The worship here didn't involve lightning bolts or oracles. It involved timing and trust. You pause at a crossroads where two dirt paths intersect. At the center, a flat stone sits with 3 sprigs of barley resting on top, not arranged, just placed. An offering, perhaps, or a reminder that even intersections can be places where something waits. Fringe detail in some villages. Farmers were forbidden from speaking aloud during their first walk through a prepared field. This ritual silence, called spermatikos siges, the seeding hush, was believed to preserve the energy of the soil. You were meant to feel your steps, to breathe gently, and above all, to keep your voice within you until the seeds were ready to hear it. Scholarly uncertainty arises around these kinds of rituals. Were they truly religious, or were they a form of early environmental respect, a recognition, conscious or not, that the land responded best to care, not conquest? Some scholars suggest that these practices may have preserved soil quality through communal pacing and low-impact rituals. Others see them as emotional metaphors, ways of connecting the act of planting with the larger, softer rhythms of life and loss. Demeter walks ahead of you again, her back to you, but her presence feels like a circle. Everything moves at her pace, which is to say, not yours. This is your journey-style moment, a short one. You stop walking, not because you're tired, but because you realize the ground here doesn't want your footsteps right now. You kneel, you place your hand flat against the soil. It's warm, not hot, not dry, just ready. Demeter pauses at the edge of a grove and turns, not fully, just enough for the corner of her robe to catch the light. She doesn't speak, She simply waits for you to realize that this moment, like the seed, is complete when it no longer needs your movement. A woman nearby scatters a handful of grain with her left hand while smoothing the soil with her right. She hums. It's not a song, it's something older than melody, like a season whispering its own name. The field responds, not with blossoms, not with proof, just with stillness that feels full, and for now. That's all Demeter asks. You rise slowly, brushing the soil from your knees. The path bends and narrows again, leading you through olive trees that seem older than anything you've walked beneath before. Their trunks twist like soft rope, bark faded to gray. A few of the branches bear cloth ribbons, weathered, colorless. Someone once tied them with care. No one's removed them. No one needs to. The grove opens onto a clearing shaped not by stone, but by habit, flat patches of earth, deliberately smoothed by hands, not tools. There are no walls, no altar. But this is a sacred space. It's where they sing to the soil. Here's your mainstream historical fact among the earliest cults of Demeter, particularly those in rural regions of Boeotia and Thessaly. Ceremonial planting was performed in silence or accompanied only by soft vocalizations humming, low chants, or murmured phrases that were never written down. The act wasn't theatrical, it was collaborative. Worshippers didn't pray to the goddess as much as with her, by performing the same gestures she was believed to have taught. You sit now at the edge of this space. A group of women is kneeling in a semicircle, hands full of barley. They don't throw the grain. They place it, fingers curled, movements slow, like the earth is fragile and must be invited rather than commanded. There's no music, just one voice at a time, repeating a phrase. It isn't loud, it isn't even clear, but the rhythm of it settles over the field like linen laid on a sleeping child. Fringe detail ancient sources describe grain weaving ceremonies, ritual acts where unplanted grain was braided, coiled, or tied into small bundles that were later buried in furrows as symbolic offerings. These weren't meant to sprout, they were offerings to Demeter's waiting self. One account from Delos records a woman burying a barley braid with the words, "You know how to sleep." Scholars aren't sure if these were metaphor or magic. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe, like seeds. These rituals didn't need explanation, they needed repetition. And here's your scholarly uncertainty. Was this worship about fertility as abundance, or was it about restraint? Some argue that Demeter's rituals taught control, not production, how to sow less, wait longer, take only enough. Others see these soft ceremonies as symbolic counterweights to the more aggressive forms of ancient sacrifice, where other gods asked for blood and flame. Demeter asked for touch, for patience, for a kind of love that grows slowly and says little. You walk quietly to the center of the clearing. One of the women offers you a small pouch of barley, not with a gesture of instruction, just inclusion. You take a pinch, you kneel, you press the grain into the soil with the side of your palm, like smoothing the corner of a blanket. This is your journey-style moment, soft, grounded, unannounced. You look up. The sky hasn't changed, but something in the air has, like the soil knows it's been asked politely. Demeter stands just beyond the tree line, watching, not approving, just witnessing. That is her gift. She sees what doesn't need to be spoken. You remain a little longer as the women continue their soft placing, their low murmurs, their gentle shaping of earth. There are no markers here. No one will know where the seeds lie. Only the goddess and the soil remember, and that's enough. The grove narrows behind you, folding back into trees and sloping paths. The sounds of planting fade, not as if they've stopped, but as if you've stepped far enough away that you're no longer meant to hear them. The air is still soft, but carries more warmth now. It smells of dust and fig leaves, of stone that's held the sun all day and is only just beginning to cool. You're walking beside a narrow channel of water, artificial, maybe, dug by hand centuries ago. It murmurs faintly as it moves, like it's carrying something not important, but familiar. The kind of sound you forget and then remember only when your eyes are half closed. Ahead, a low structure. Not a temple, a shrine, maybe, but its walls are no higher than your waist, and the roof is little more than woven reeds stretched over a wooden frame. There are no guards, no grand statues, only words, not carved in marble, not set in gold, just inked on soft fabric, aged scrolls, and weathered scraps, fragments from the Homeric hymn to Demeter. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Homeric hymn to Demeter, composed sometime between the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, is one of the oldest literary sources recounting the myth of Demeter and her daughter Persephone. But unlike many myths packed with monsters or hubris, the hymn's tone is slow, mournful, and deeply human. It speaks of separation, search, grief, and eventually restoration, but only after loss has taught patience. The hymn was recited during sacred rites, especially at Eleusis, but versions of it were copied and passed around, sometimes incomplete. Bits of it were stitched into robes, whispers of it etched into garden walls, not as commandment, as comfort. Fringe detail in certain households, a line from the hymn, the earth bears fruit again, but only after the stillness, was written above doorways, sometimes in paint, sometimes in chalk, sometimes traced with a fingertip after rain. It wasn't always meant to be read, just to exist. Here's your scholarly uncertainty: was the hymn merely narrative, myth explaining the seasons, or was it instructional? Did listeners believe Demeter's story described not just the turning of the year, but how to live within it? Was it a tale or a cycle? You kneel now beside the shrine. A scrap of cloth flutters from a reed pole. The ink is mostly faded, but one phrase remains. She sat beside the well, silent, and the earth waited with her. There's no offering bowl, no incense, just a flat stone where people place their palms for a moment before standing again. You do the same, not to ask, not to promise, just to rest your hand on something that's waited longer than you've known how to kneel. And this is your journey-style moment, quiet, unmoving. The hymn isn't being read aloud, but it's present, in the hush, in the posture, in the slowness of the breeze moving through the fig leaves overhead. Demeter herself stands just beyond the wall of the grove now, her presence not as light or shadow, but as gravity. You feel her not in your vision, but in your shoulders, in the way your breathing matches the line of the earth again. The words on the cloth aren't instructions, they're reminders. You sit for a while longer beside the reed-roofed shrine. A beetle crosses your sandal. You don't move, you don't need to. The seeds beneath the soil are not stirring yet. but they will. The air is thick with late daylight now, the kind that feels golden even after the sun has disappeared behind the hills. You're following a narrow furrow that winds through a low field, not straight, not sharp. It curves gently, as if drawn by someone with time, with rhythm, and with more interest in care than speed. And the soil beneath your feet isn't just earth anymore, it's potential. This is where the myth says it began, not the world, not Olympus, but something smaller, simpler, and far more lasting. This is where Demeter taught the first furrow. Here's your mainstream historical fact across several regional myths, particularly those preserved in Eleusinian tradition. Demeter is credited with teaching humanity the practice of agriculture, not in abstract terms, but in tools: how to till the ground, plant seed, and care for what lies hidden. Her lessons didn't begin with growth. They began with how to mark the soil, how to show the land you were ready to meet it halfway. The first furrow wasn't a command, it was a gesture. Fringe detail, one fragmentary myth, preserved only in passing by later Greek commentators, speaks of Demeter tracing the first furrow with the end of her veil, dragging the linen edge along the ground in a spiral, not a line. This spiral, called helic in some versions, was believed to encourage balance and gentle yield. Farmers in some regions repeated this circular start before switching to rows, as a form of blessing. You kneel now beside a furrow just beginning. The soil is soft but unbroken, waiting. Demeter walks slowly across the field, her staff carving a shallow trail behind her, barely a breath deep. She doesn't look behind to see if it's straight. That isn't the point. The earth responds not to precision, but to presence. Here's your scholarly uncertainty was the story of Demeter teaching plowing metaphorical, or historical memory wrapped in myth. Scholars still debate whether the earliest myths reflect an actual memory of agricultural revolution, perhaps the shift from foraging to farming in early Greek societies. Others see these stories as spiritual allegories, learning not to dominate the land, but to collaborate with it. A field is not a canvas, it is a partner, and the furrow is how you say hello. This is your journey-style moment. You stand at the beginning of the furrow. Demeter hands you a thin branch, not heavy, not sharp. She nods once toward the ground. You press it into the soil, not deep, just enough to feel the give. You draw a line forward, not perfectly, not quickly, just steadily. The soil folds back without resistance. You feel the earth take the shape you've offered, and in return, it holds it. That's the quiet exchange. Demeter walks beside you for a time, not speaking, not correcting. She simply matches your pace as you finish the first row. She stops, lifts a pinch of seed from her pouch, lets it fall into the groove you've made. Then she waits, not to see it sprout, just to witness the moment when the land has been asked to begin. A breeze passes across the furrow. The seeds shift slightly. A few grains roll into the shadow of your footprint. And for a long time, no one moves, because the first furrow is never about what grows. It's about what stays behind. The furrow fades behind you. A shallow line now softened by wind and the light fall of evening dew. You're walking toward a structure, not grand, not imposing, just a series of marble steps that lead nowhere in particular. They rise from the earth like something half remembered, and they end before any door. But you recognize this place. It's Eleusis, not the city, not the temple, the feeling of Eleusis, the moment before something sacred begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most famous and secretive of all Greek religious rites, were centered on Demeter and Persephone. They took place in the sanctuary at Eleusis, near Athens, and lasted for nearly 2,000 years. What happened there remains unknown. Initiates were sworn to secrecy, but we know the structure: a ritual of descent, stillness, and return, a mirror of Demeter's grief and Persephone's cycle, a rite not of conquest, but of waiting. You walk slowly up the steps. They're worn, warm, and faintly damp with evening air. Small offerings have been left in the cracks: withered flowers, bits of wheat, a folded cloth stained with pigment. Someone sat here. Once, maybe many someones. You're not alone, but you're not being watched. You're being welcomed, quietly. Fringe detail in some reconstructions of the Eleusinian rituals. Scholars believe that part of the ceremony involved descending into a darkened chamber, where initiates sat in silence, surrounded by grain, soil, and water. Nothing happened, not at first. The ritual wasn't a spectacle, it was a space, a hollowing out. The idea was to sit with absence until you could carry presence again. And here's your scholarly uncertainty: what was actually revealed in the mysteries. No one knows. Not truly. Some argue it was the showing of a sacred object, perhaps a single ear of grain. Others suggest it was a feeling, a shift, a deeply private moment. One scholar wrote, "They were not taught anything. They were reminded. You kneel now at the top of the steps. There is no altar, no hymn, but a hush falls over your shoulders like a veil. Demeter is not visible, but her absence isn't empty. It's deliberate. This is your journey-style immersion stillness that's been prepared for. You close your eyes. You breathe. Around you, the field falls quiet. Even the insects pause. The marble holds your weight as if it's always expected you to arrive. And then, softly, from within the earth, a scent. Not perfume, not incense, just the smell of loam, of new roots, of grain that has not yet sprouted, but has begun to think about it. A group of women sits farther down the path, their heads bowed. They are not meditating, they are holding still. That's the practice here. Not enlightenment, not confession, just stillness. Because that's what Demeter taught first: not how to reap, but how to be with the waiting. You remain on the step for a long time. Nothing changes. And somehow, everything does. You're still on the steps when you notice it: a subtle change in the air. Not colder, not louder, just emptier, like something has stepped away and left a space behind. The kind of quiet that doesn't settle on your shoulders, but in your chest. It's Persephone's absence, and everything, soil, seed, sky, knows it. You rise slowly and walk along a path lined with stalks of last season's barley. They're dry now, hollow sounding when touched. A breeze rattles through them with the hush of a mother folding a blanket, long after the child has gone. This isn't grief that burns. This is grief that waits. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The myth of Demeter and Persephone formed the core of the Eleusinian cycle, and its seasonal echo was embedded into daily agricultural life. The story was not simply told, It was mirrored when Persephone descended into the underworld. Demeter's sorrow was expressed through the land planting halted, growth slowed, and offerings were made in silence. When Persephone returned, so did the harvest. Myth and season became indistinguishable. But what's often overlooked is this middle space, the months when Persephone was gone. This was not dead time. It was sacred dormancy. It was when Demeter didn't mourn loudly, but taught the earth how to hold still. Fringe detail in some rural rituals. Farmers left small handfuls of unthreshed grain beneath their household altars during the winter months. They weren't offerings to the dead. They were symbols of waiting, a promise that growth would come back, not by force, but by rhythm. The grain wasn't touched until the first spring rain. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did the myth teach people to accept loss, or to recognize rest? Some scholars argue that Demeter's stillness was a warning, a divine consequence of grief. Others say it was a gift, the permission to stop, to pause, to let the field lie empty without shame. You step into a clearing where the ground is bare, not barren, just resting. The soil looks darker here, as if it's been turned and turned again, and then left alone. You kneel beside it, press your hand to its surface. It's warm, not from sun, from holding on. This is your journey-style immersion, sitting in a space made for what is not yet here. You don't plant, you don't plan, you simply acknowledge that Persephone is gone, and the world knows how to hold that absence gently. Demeter appears on the far side of the clearing, not walking, just present. She says nothing, but the way she stands, arms folded, weight even, gaze soft, says all there is to say. She isn't asking for change. She's honoring the stillness between changes. One of the women from earlier arrives beside you and sets a small bundle on the soil, cloth wrapped, weighted with something unseen. Then she walks away. You don't ask what it is, because some parts of this myth are not for understanding. They're for sitting with. A wind moves through the clearing. The barley rustles behind you, but the earth does not move. And that's the point. Dormancy is not a failure to grow. It's how growing begins. The ground beneath you feels heavier now, not with burden, but with depth. You've walked through furrows, over steps, beside offerings, and still, the soil hasn't asked for anything. It has only received. And here, on the edge of a shaded glade, you find an altar that doesn't burn. It's low to the ground, rounded at the edges, and covered not in ash or blood, but in soft things, cloth, dried honey cakes, bunches of chamomile, folded leaves tied with flax string. Nothing scorches, nothing cries out. This is an altar for Demeter, but it's one that never saw fire. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While many Greek deities were worshipped through animal sacrifice and burning offerings, Demeter was often honored with Anapuran rituals, rites without fire. Her altars accepted raw grain, honey, fresh fruit, and simple handmade goods. The reason wasn't dogma, it was tone. Demeter's worship emphasized softness, cycles, and sufficiency. Her power didn't demand flame, it preferred presence. You kneel beside the altar. Someone has left a row of tiny cakes shaped like ears of grain. Another offering or rests under a piece of wool, barely visible, clearly placed with care, and over everything a fine powdering of barley dust, like a blessing that's already landed. Fringe detail in some lesser-known Demeter cults, particularly those around Phanios and Arcadia, offerings were delivered not in daylight, but just before dawn. Worshippers would walk barefoot through damp grass, place their gifts in silence, and leave before the sun touched the stones. It wasn't secrecy, it was reverence. You didn't present offerings, you left them and trusted the goddess would feel them settle. Scholarly uncertainty lingers over these rituals. Were they unique to Demeter or part of a broader, unrecorded tradition of quiet worship? Some archaeologists suggest that the absence of fire-based evidence at certain Demeter shrines may reflect a gentler, pre-Olympian layer of Greek religion, one rooted in land, hush, and daily survival. You set your own offering on the altar now. You didn't know you had one, but in your pocket there's a sprig of dried thyme, picked absent-mindedly earlier in the walk. It's not grand, not rare, but it came with you. You place it gently on the stones. No sound follows. No sign confirms it's been accepted, and that's what makes it real. This is your journey-style moment, not in motion, but in placement. You lean back. You fold your hands loosely in your lap. The altar doesn't ask, it receives. The field doesn't reply, it holds. You look up. Demeter is still nearby, standing beneath a fig tree, watching, not the offerings, but the quiet around them. Her gaze is not one of expectation, it's one of understanding. You realize then this altar is not a plea for growth. It's gratitude for what has not been taken, for what lies beneath the soil, untouched, unspoiled, and waiting. Even without fire, the altar glows, not with flame, with care. The sky above has turned to that soft, colorless shade that means the day has left. But night hasn't arrived fully yet. It's the in-between time, the hush between notes, and fittingly, you're entering a part of the field that doesn't belong to one person or one task. It belongs to those who tend. You follow a narrow trail past a weathered fence. There's no gate, just an open stretch of ground lined with terracotta pots, half-buried stones, and scattered petals from an earlier bloom. This isn't farmland. It's not a temple either. It's a place of practice, and the ones who gather here do so without fanfare. These are Demeter's women. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The worship of Demeter in ancient Greece was sustained not just by priests, but by priestesses, lay women, and generations of women who passed down rituals through household memory and agricultural repetition. Some were initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. Others served in small local cults. Many more simply walked the fields, sang over furrows, and offered the first grain of harvest to the goddess each year. You see them now, not as a group, but as presences scattered across the space. A woman brushes dust from a stone basin. Another smooths her palms over the rim of an empty pot. One carries a bundle of dried stalks, not to burn, but to weave into something that looks like a basket and smells like last year's sun. None of them speak, not because they are solemn, because they are with the work. Fringe detail in some regions. Women caring for Demeter's fields did so barefoot from the first planting through the first sprout. It was said that shoes interrupted the earth's memory. Whether superstition or symbol, the act was consistent, quiet, grounded, and repeated over centuries. You pass by a low bench where bundles of wool sit in the sun, slowly warming. A priestess, or perhaps just an older woman who knows this land, sits nearby threading lengths of flax through her fingers. She hums something low, something patternless. It matches the rhythm of the fireflies that have begun to appear just above the wheat tips. Here's your scholarly uncertainty: were these women performing a public role or a private devotion? Many historians believe the boundary was porous. Household rituals flowed into field rituals, which in turn echoed back into communal ceremonies. The worship of Demeter was never just religion, it was livelihood, family, seasons, loss, restoration, carried by those who could kneel long enough to notice a sprout emerging before anyone else did. This is your journey style moment now. A woman places a small clay bowl in your hands. Inside a few grains of barley and a single dried rose petal. She gestures toward the field, not to instruct you, but to let you decide. You walk slowly. You pause. You choose a spot with no markers. You press the bowl to the ground and upend it gently. The contents fall soundlessly. You smooth the earth over with your palm. You don't pat it. You don't mark it. You leave it. Demeter watches from the far end of the field now. She nods, not in approval, but in rhythm. The women around you continue working, not for completion, but for continuity. One of them lights a small lamp and places it beneath a fig tree, not to see by, just so the tree remembers the gesture. The field behind you has faded into night. The women have returned to their homes or disappeared between rows of barley. Their work is not done, but it no longer needs to be watched. It will continue, softly, seasonally, without announcement. You move now along a shaded path flanked by young olive trees. The air smells of warm stone and something sweet, a late bloom of jasmine, perhaps, or the last hint of honey left out as an offering. And then, just past a bend in the path, you see it, a grove, unremarkable at first, no statues, no inscriptions, just trees spaced evenly, leaves stirring faintly in the dusk. But the closer you move, the quieter everything becomes. The crickets fall silent, the breeze lowers its voice. Even your own footsteps start to feel like something borrowed. This place is listening. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Among the lesser-known stories of Demeter is a localized myth, one that never made it into the Homeric hymn or the more famous versions. In it, Demeter comes to a cursed grove, one that once bore fruit but had been struck by drought, misuse, or neglect. The exact cause is never named, but in this version, Demeter does not curse further. She does not rage. She waits, and then, slowly, she teaches the grove how to rest. Fringe details some villages in Arcadia told of a sleeping grove sacred to Demeter, where planting was forbidden and no fruit was ever picked. Elders claimed Demeter had laid her hand on the bark of each tree and asked it to dream instead of bear. Children were told not to speak aloud when passing through, not out of fear, but out of respect for a place doing sacred nothing. You step into the grove now. The trees are old, not grand, but patient. Their branches twist in slow gestures. Their bark bears the faint impressions of hands, as though someone long ago pressed her palms to each one and whispered something only the roots still remember. You place your hand on a low branch. It doesn't move, but it feels present, like it's still deciding whether to be tree or memory. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Was this story of Demeter and the sleeping grove symbolic of fallow land? Or was it something deeper, an early ecological myth wrapped in divinity? Some historians view it as a parable of restraint, how care sometimes looks like withdrawal. Others see it as a spiritual metaphor for grief, healing, and the refusal to force fruit from something not yet ready. You sit now at the base of one of the trees. Its roots curve gently around you, not holding, but offering shape. You lean into the bark. It's cool and rough, not uncomfortable, just aware. And this is your journey style immersion, to be here and do nothing, to match the pace of a grove that Demeter herself once asked to rest. In one tale, she returned after many years. She did not plant, she did not harvest. She simply walked among the trees, and when she left, a single blossom had opened. That was all. You stay until the night settles fully, and the grove, still asleep, seems to welcome you into its dreaming. You leave the grove slowly, careful not to disturb the stillness behind you. The trees do not sway as you pass. They've returned to their dreaming. The path dips slightly, and the air becomes cooler, moister, somewhere nearby. You hear water not rushing, just the occasional glug and trickle of rain gathered in stone. This part of the valley doesn't hold fields or shrines. It holds something subtler. This is where Demeter asked for rain, not with thunder, not with sacrifice, just with patience. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Unlike Zeus or Poseidon, gods of spectacle and storm, Demeter was not associated with commanding weather. Instead, she was believed to influence timing, the slow, seasonal shifts, the kind of rain that came not as a downpour, but as a return. Her devotees didn't beg for it. They prepared for it by tending the soil, by watching the wind, by learning the signals the plants gave before thirst became crisis. They didn't pray for rain. They asked it to arrive gently. Fringe detail in several rural cults. Small rain-inviting rituals were held not during droughts, but just before expected seasonal showers. These invocations involved no loud music, no dramatic symbols. Instead, women carried bowls of spring water out to the fields and poured them slowly into the furrows at dawn, whispering phrases like, "We remember how to wait." Some villages left the bowls overturned afterward, a sign to the sky that they trusted the rain to come. You stand now beside one such bowl, old, cracked, moss growing around its rim. Someone has placed it beneath an almond tree. There's no water in it, only a single smooth stone. A message, maybe, or a promise. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did these gentle rituals function more as emotional anchors than meteorological ones? Some scholars suggest the purpose was not to influence weather, but to practice hope, to create a structure around waiting so that people wouldn't mistake delay for abandonment. That Demeter, in her own mythic rhythm, was never late, just deliberate. You sit now beside the furrowed edge of a field. It hasn't been planted, it hasn't been watered, but it has been smoothed. The lines are clear. Someone came here yesterday, or the day before, and readied it, not because rain was promised, but because it was possible. This is your journey-style moment. You reach for a handful of earth, turn it over in your palm, and feel the way it holds a trace of moisture, not enough to sprout anything, but enough to matter. You release it. It falls back soundlessly. Demeter passes nearby, her footsteps slow, as if walking just ahead of a cloud that hasn't formed yet. She doesn't speak, but she pauses, and from the folds of her robe, she drops 3 drops of water into the bowl. Not a storm, not a miracle, just an agreement. You glance upward. The sky hasn't changed. There are no signs of rain, but the soil no longer waits alone. And that, you realize, is what Demeter taught the most patient fields. Rain comes not to the loudest, nor to the ones who demand it, but to the ones who prepared a place for it. You wake, though not from sleep, and realize you're farther down the valley now, near the edge of a field that feels full, not with people, not with crops, but with completion. This is the place where grain has already grown. The stalks are tall, golden, and leaning in a way that suggests they've reached the end of what they came here to do. There's no wind, no tool in sight, just rows and rows of harvest, not yet gathered, but unmistakably ready. And no one is rushing, because in Demeter's rhythm, harvest isn't a conquest, it's gratitude. Here's your mainstream historical fact in the agricultural rituals tied to Demeter. The harvest was not treated as the peak of the story, it was the response, the soft thank you after a long silence, rather than feasts of victory. Demeter's rites often marked the end of the growing season with restraint. Grains were gathered by hand. Offerings were made of the first sheaf, not the largest. And above all, there was an understanding just because something has ripened doesn't mean you must take it all. Fringe detail in certain regions of Arcadia and Messenia. It was customary to leave the final few stalks of a grain field untouched. These were not forgotten. They were intentional. A small standing bundle, known as the kalathiskos, or little basket. Some say it was for the field itself. Others say it was for Demeter. Either way, it remained until the rains came again. You're standing beside one such bundle now. It leans slightly, tied with a faded ribbon of flax. A smooth stone sits at its base, not carved, just selected. There are no tools here, no scythes, no sickles, because in this part of the valley, the harvest is not urgent. It's a response, a bow, a hand laid softly on the shoulder of the season that brought you here. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Was this restraint born from religious reverence or practical wisdom? Some archaeologists argue that leaving grain in the field supported soil health and reseeding. Others believe it was symbolic, a gesture of humility in the face of nature's unpredictability. The line between belief and sustainability is blurry, which in Demeter's world may have been the point. You kneel beside the bundle. The stalks are dry. They whisper when touched, not the sound of rustling, but of releasing. The grain has done its part. Now it waits. This is your journey-style immersion. You lay your palm flat against the ground beside the bundle, not to mark it, not to bless it, just to join it for a moment. You match the stillness of something that has given all it needs to give. Demeter stands in the distance, barefoot now, her robe drawn back, her hands empty, not because she's lost something, because she's done. She walks through the field slowly, fingers brushing the tops of the uncut grain. She does not gather, she does not weigh. She simply walks as someone who remembers what the seed looked like when it first entered the earth, and in her silence, you hear the most powerful thing a harvest can say. Thank you, that's enough. The harvest field drifts behind you now, like a lullaby that's finished its final line. You're walking through a stretch of ground that hasn't been tilled, hasn't been planted, and doesn't plan to be. Not this year, maybe not next. The grass grows taller here. Wildflowers poke up without sequence. There's no furrow, no ritual, no pressing of palms. This land is fallow, and that too is sacred. Here's your mainstream historical fact in many regions of ancient Greece. It was customary to let land rest between plantings, typically 1 year in every 2 or 3. This wasn't simply good farming practice, it was built into cultural and religious rhythms. Fallow fields were seen not as failures of use, but as living things in pause. Letting land lie untouched was understood as a gesture of both reverence and foresight. Demeter's presence wasn't confined to fields in bloom. She was also honored in fields asleep. Fringe detail in Attica. Certain valleys known to be fertile were left untouched during particular years of sacred festival cycles, especially those linked to Demeter and Persephone. Shrines were built not on cultivated plots, but beside fallow ground. Some poems call these places the breathing lands, as if to say the earth itself was exhaling. You walk through one now. The air is warmer here, not because of sunlight, but because nothing has been taken from this soil in some time. The grasses bend, uncut. Insects hum softly, uninterested in your presence. A single rabbit scurries beneath the ferns. There's no fear here, just permission. And here's your scholarly uncertainty: was fallow practice more ritual or necessity? Some historians argue the religious framing came later, wrapped around practices already in place to conserve soil. Others believe it was always both, that ancient peoples that didn't separate practical survival from spiritual timing. Rest was never optional. It was required by nature and reflected in myth. You reach a low ridge now, overlooking the valley. In the distance, you can see the patchwork of fields, some green, some gold, some brown and undisturbed. You sit. This is your journey-style immersion. Your hands rest loosely in your lap. No pouch of grain to offer, no soil to smooth. For the first time, your role isn't participant, it's witness. Demeter appears again, not walking now, but seated in the field below, her back to you, her head bowed just slightly. She's not watching the planted rows. She's watching the places that have been left alone, the silence between the crops, the pause between the songs. You understand now why she was never a goddess of harvest alone. She was the goddess of intervals, of patience, of stillness that feeds the future. One of the fallow fields glows faintly in the evening sun, not bright, not gold. Just a warm, dull light that comes when something has absorbed more than it has spent. That is what Demeter taught, to let what has given rest, to let what has been emptied wait. You stay a little longer, listening to the breath of a field that doesn't need you, and yet accepts your presence. Then you rise, not to act, just to move at the same speed as the land that lies still. The night has arrived gently. No sudden darkness, no last flash of sunlight, just a soft, slow dimming of the world until everything around you has become hushed and colorless, like the landscape has laid itself down for sleep. You're back where you began, though the field looks different now, not because it has changed, but because you have. The furrows you walked are still there. The grove still breathes. The uncut grain still waits in its ribboned bundle. But now, They feel less like stops along a path and more like echoes of a single quiet voice. Demeter's voice, the one that taught seeds to rest. And now she teaches you the same. You lie down in the field, head resting against a patch of soft grass. It isn't perfectly smooth. A small stone presses gently beneath your shoulder. The scent of warm earth drifts upward, faint and steady. You close your eyes, not to escape the world, but to join it. You've walked with a goddess tonight, not one of storm or war, but one who hums to sleeping seeds and waits with empty hands. Demeter has shown you how the earth rests, not because it is weak, but because it remembers. You breathe in slowly and out. Let your body mirror the land loose, rooted and unfinished. There is no need to harvest your thoughts, no need to tidy the edges of your day. Let them remain scattered, like husks in a quiet field. Let your thoughts lie fallow. Let them soften, sink, and go still. There is no urgency now, nothing to grow, nothing to prove. You do not need to rise early to plant. You do not need to prepare an offering. You already have. You were present. That was enough. Somewhere nearby, a furrow still holds the warmth of your palm. Somewhere, a grain waits, resting beneath the soil, exactly where you left it. It does not dream. It does not speak, but it listens and breathes just as you do now. The wind is a little cooler, the night deeper, but the silence isn't empty. It's ready. Let yourself drift into it, like a seed wrapped in sleep, held in soil, awaiting nothing. Be still now. You're exactly where the whisper was always leading you.